Hey there, thanks for tuning into Duckbricks. I'm Chris, and today we pose a simple but important question. Why can't LEGO Bionicle return as a full-on theme? And there's actually a lot more nuance to this question than it may seem. If you don't know, LEGO Bionicle was obviously one of LEGO's most popular lines, lasting nearly 10 years, from 2001 to 2010, where it was unfortunately shelved and brought back for a very short-lived lifespan with Bionicle Generation 2 in 2015 and 2016. But at this point, aside from a few Easter eggs and GWPs, we haven't really seen much of Bionicle. And now, we're gonna dive into why exactly that is. Why can't LEGO bring these back? Let's jump into it right now. Now before we get into this video, I want to just give a big shout out to the amazing Bionicle fan community. Despite the mainline story of G1 ending over 10 years ago, the fans are still continuing to make incredible creations. From mocks to games to artwork, the Bionicle fandom is very much alive, and they are absolutely still carrying the torch on for LEGO. But for those asking why LEGO can't bring Bionicle back as a full-on theme and not just let it live in the hearts and minds of fans, well, this video is for you. See, this is the question I get a lot on a ton of videos on different platforms. I've had people come up to me in real life and ask me why I think that LEGO won't bring back Bionicle, and it's honestly a really complicated explanation. There isn't really a clean and easy one-sentence explanation as to why it frankly doesn't make financial sense for LEGO to resurrect Bionicle in really any form outside of Easter eggs and maybe a GWP here and there, and I'm here to tell you why. Now, I figured the start of 2025 was the perfect time to put out a video like this because I keep on hearing people coming and asking me and asking a lot of folks in the community about these rumors going around about Bionicle coming back in 2025 and how this year is going to be the big return for Bionicle. And I hate to break it to you, but that's not gonna happen. And honestly, it is as simple as saying that we would know by now. We've somehow gotten pretty credible rumors of full-on set lists for the summer wave of almost all the LEGO themes. We've gotten confirmations of some crazy out there new LEGO themes like One Piece and Star Trek, and honestly, it would have leaked by now. We would know if Bionicle was coming back as a full theme in 2025. But even beyond that, there's a lot of reasons as to why it just doesn't make sense for LEGO to do that. And I will caveat this, if Bionicle actually comes back in 2025, heck, in the next 2 to 3 years as a full-on LEGO theme, I will buy 10 copies of every set and do a massive giveaway on this channel. I mean, even without this promise, I might have done that already anyways. But that is how sure I am that honestly, it's just not going to happen. And this is a little unfortunate, I know, but it is the truth of the matter. You see, every year it seems somebody comes up with some crazy rumor that Bionicle is coming back, and every year it just doesn't really come to pass. And usually you can tell when these rumors are true or not. Honestly, I think that a lot of old school Bionicle G1 fans often get tricked by these rumors because maybe they just aren't 100% caught up with the current LEGO scene, and I don't blame them. If you were a fan of Bionicle when it was coming out, and maybe not the biggest fan of everything else LEGO was putting out as a company, it totally makes sense that after Bionicle's discontinuation, you might not have kept up with LEGO. So it's very easy to understand if people can get easily tricked by rumors that generally the wider LEGO community definitely knows to be false. But it's not just about rumors being created and getting people excited and never coming to fruition. There's a lot more behind why definitively it doesn't really make sense for LEGO to bring back Bionicle. And I really want to dive into 4 key factors here. We're going to split this up into talking about LEGO's current policy about molds and discontinuing plastic molds, the failure of Bionicle Generation 2, the storyline of Bionicle G1 and the lessons learned from that, and finally, the feasibility of what Bionicle being brought back would look like, and finally, we'll end this video with maybe a bit of a silver lining, about how even though Bionicle probably will not ever come back as a full-on theme, there may be still some hope for Bionicle-related stuff coming in the future. So let's dive into my first point right now.
The key to Nangu?
As we jump into this point, a few months ago I put out a video about why LEGO destroys their molds and why they can't just bring back old sets one-to-one. If you've seen that video, you can probably skip this section. You know what's up. But in case you didn't get a chance to check out that video, I'm gonna give you the cliff notes right now. So basically, one of the most common questions I get in general, even not just relating to Bionicle, is why doesn't LEGO just bring back old sets? Companies like Hasbro can do it for Transformers and other product lines, so why can't LEGO? And the thing is, first of all, every LEGO set represents years and years of incremental improvements to the system. Building techniques, stability, and playability granularly improve every single year. And even if you look at a standard LEGO system set designed just a few years ago, the amount of building techniques, new pieces, and just sensibilities that modern LEGO sets bring is completely night and day different. There are massive improvements to each set. And this logic even applies to specific LEGO parts. For instance, any Bionicle fan will know just how much the simple Bionicle ball and socket joint piece changed. From its introduction in the late 90s for Throwbots and Robo-Riders, then popularized in Bionicle with 2001, then trying to course correct and make it more stable in 2008 only to make it even less stable, then getting redesigned again for 2011's CCBS, the Character and Creature Building System, and then finally in 2021's latest redesign to have even better friction and stability. LEGO continually improves their parts, and it's stuff like this that really prevents LEGO from ever just re-releasing, say, a Bionicle G1 set one-to-one. The joints are strictly inferior, and years of iteration has proven that. But the main point I'm getting to here is that LEGO as a company has changed a lot from when they started Bionicle in 2001 to today. In 2001, the company was frankly floundering. LEGO was completely stuck behind trying to come up with the next big thing, iterating and iterating on more and more varied and different toys that really brought themselves out of their core competency, which was the simple LEGO brick, and trying to capitalize on current trends. And in Bionicle's case, they kinda just got lucky. The latest in their many attempts to go after the action figure trend and capitalize specifically on the American boy, Bionicle just happened to do really well, thanks to a number of reasons that honestly merit a video on its own. Mostly in part due to the amazing Motonui online game which sucked people into the world, the massive marketing campaign they had through McDonald's to introduce a ton of people to the new characters and setting of the world of Bionicle, and of course, the incredible toys themselves, the bright colors, the collectability of them, the unique packaging. So many factors went into making Bionicle a success, especially when compared to the rest of LEGO's portfolio in 2001, where the company was frankly really struggling, not even saved fully by the advent of LEGO Star Wars because of course they still had to pay licensing fees for those. Bionicle was an original IP, and one of the most unique original IPs at the time that it was very story driven, unlike really many of LEGO's other original IPs, where stuff like adventures, space, pirates, or castle had gone by just by playing off of basic archetypes and letting kids create their own stories. But most importantly, especially in 2001, but honestly, it was a mindset that pervaded through most of the early to late 2000s, LEGO was very trigger happy on creating exclusive, specialized, one-off new molds that really only served a very specific purpose and might even only appear in a single set, and Bionicle was the epitome of this mindset. 6 Toa heroes, each with 6 uniquely molded masks, 6 uniquely molded weapons, and of course, every few years they would reinvent the system, creating different limbs and arm joints and functions, and very specific elements tied towards just the specific action figure toys they were trying to sell. If you look at LEGO's portfolio today, there isn't really any other theme like Bionicle that got that many new molds. LEGO was treating it like a completely different toy, and it was just a completely different mindset compared to what LEGO has today. Where today, LEGO has a very strict policy. The molds used to create new LEGO pieces are destroyed after 5 years of not being used in a set, and a strong case must be made to keep them around. This information comes from The Secret Life of LEGO Bricks, which is an exclusive book that thankfully is now fully available after a very limited crowdfunding period in 2020. Now, there are a lot of reasons as to why molds are destroyed. The reason the book gives is that it's quote-unquote more economical to destroy molds than to keep them in storage, meaning it's literally cheaper for LEGO to destroy the part mold rather than to pay to store them in a climate-controlled warehouse, especially if they probably will not be used again. But there obviously are a lot more factors that go into this, and even since I published my last video on the topic of destroying molds, I've gotten a chance to talk to people working at LEGO, actual LEGO designers, and even have a tour of the LEGO factory, and got a little bit of a better understanding as to why LEGO just doesn't keep them around to begin with. And to analyze this, we have to go back in the past. This was not always the case. Before the year 2000, it was really rare for a LEGO mold to be destroyed. The parts palette continued to grow year after year, and prior to the mid-1990s, LEGO didn't even have an electronic database of all their elements. Designers had to rely on an analog element archive, personal lists, and their own memories to know which parts were available and which were not. Retiring elements and destroying molds only occurred if a new or better element came along to strictly replace it, such as any time LEGO would upgrade their electronics. But by the late 90s to early 2000s, it was a period of great financial upheaval for the company. There was a lot of poor decision making internally within LEGO, and they basically were making hundreds of single-use molds for one-off sets, making these highly specialized pieces that rarely could be used outside the intended purpose. Because of this rapid expenditure and expansion of LEGO's part catalog, it was simply no longer feasible to keep every mold around forever, especially when certain molds were tailor-made for themes that perform poorly. Take LEGO Galador for instance, part of LEGO's ambitious Project Genesis offering, which I've also made a completely different video on, that was intended to launch LEGO into a brand new category of buildable action figures, where, after the failure of that line, every single mold used for that line, save for a very brief limited amount of pieces that made their way into some other system themes, were basically just useless and never used again in LEGO's portfolio. It simply did not make sense to continue to store such a large number of molds, elements, and color variants. So at this point, it was very obvious LEGO had to simplify their element library, and long story short, they got together a group of veteran designers who sat down and were like, hey, we have way too many pieces. Why on earth do we have over 100 different LEGO wheels, many of which with the same diameters? Let's just go ahead and kill most of them. And this is the really interesting part. It literally took LEGO an entire decade, from 2000 to 2010, to actually cull all of their redundant molds and finally assign ID numbers to every element, create a company-wide database to manage its parts catalog called the Easy Builder System, or the EBT, and begin establishing standards for existing families of components that defined rules for when they could be added to. If that time period sounds familiar to you, well, that was the entire lifespan of Bionicle Generation 1. That's right, Bionicle G1 from 2001 to 2010 was releasing at a time where LEGO was completely rethinking their entire process for mold creation. They literally did not finish and finalize this process until the year that Bionicle was discontinued, which means that Bionicle honestly got away with creating so many new molds during its run, mostly because LEGO designers, and LEGO mold designers in particular, were far too busy culling down the amount of molds they had created in the past to focus on Bionicle continuing to create more. To put it simply, Bionicle got away with a lot more than any other LEGO theme could get away with today, even the most profitable LEGO themes. And by the time Bionicle ended, well, LEGO introduced CCBS, the Character and Creature Building System, which was an entirely new action figure system designed specifically to prevent the issue that Bionicle in particular, but many other LEGO themes had caused, with so many different pieces being created every single year. With CCBS, they could keep the same bones, the same skeleton for every single construction model, whether it be Bionicle, or Legends of Chima, or even Star Wars CCBS in 2015. They could basically use the same pieces and only dedicate just a couple of new pieces, maybe per set at most, to just introduce for a buildable action figure line. And even then, it became much more common for sets and action figure themes, like Hero Factory, to reuse the same exact helmet pieces for at least a couple of sets, in order to prevent this parts bloat. Nowadays, LEGO basically holds a yearly parts catalog review effort, and thanks to the digital database, they can tell how many products a given part has been included with in recent years and cull those that aren't being used. The way it works is that design teams select an element ambassador from their ranks to join the review effort and make their case for parts that should be preserved for one reason or another. Designers have to basically argue and present their arguments as to why LEGO shouldn't destroy the mold for pieces, and frankly, it's hard to argue with results. Due to this incredibly rigorous process of designers arguing to keep elements around, basically LEGO has saved a lot of money. The LEGO Group as a whole is more profitable than ever, and obviously this is due to a ton of different factors. But a big part of it is that they are much more careful about creating new molds nowadays. Now, molds have to be really justified to be created, even if they are one-off molds for a specific purpose, and outside of the collectible minifigure series, it is incredibly rare for LEGO to make a new mold. The way things work now is that themes as a whole are allocated a certain amount of element frames to work with, where frames is synonymous with a new mold. A team can choose to pour all of their element frames into minifigures, and then they can have unique minifigure helmets or armor or weapons, but then maybe they wouldn't have too many unique elements to use for the rest of their sets to make them stand apart. Or, a LEGO design team could choose to create a brand new element to represent the theme as a whole, and give the sets a unique and cohesive visual identity, something that the LEGO Dreams team has been doing by introducing multi-function pieces. A single piece can be used for plants, or recolored to be a jet exhaust, or smoke, or the laser fire out of a blaster, and by reusing a single piece in multiple different ways in different colors, it makes it a lot cheaper for them to be able to make sets feel unique without necessarily having to have unique elements per set. I actually spoke to the LEGO Ninjago design team about this because this was a topic that particularly interested me. In 2023, they introduced a new main villain for Ninjago, Lord Roz, who had a very specialized tiger-like head mold. Now, in any other theme, this might be a very specific and limited piece. Obviously, it's super specific to Ninjago, it's very unlikely that it will ever be used outside of the theme, and how would they justify creating a specialized new piece like this? And well, the answer was by including it in as many sets as possible, the cost to make the mold actually became cheaper for them when they spread out the costs across the entire line. Because Lord Roz's head and his minifigure appeared throughout a ton of different sets, from magazines, big sets, small sets, and even continued to be recolored into 2024 and 2025, they could justify continuing to have a specialized mold be created for the piece, and continue to use it in sets at a much cheaper cost. The same even goes for something specialized like arm printing, leg printing, or dual molding on a minifigure. That's why for original LEGO themes like Monkey Kid and Dreams, you'll often see the main character of the theme use dual molding or printing on the side of the legs, and really just the main character, and that is because the main character will appear in the most sets, making it easy to spread the cost of this specialized piece across multiple sets. It is most expensive for LEGO to create, say, a new mold, a dual molded component, or an arm printed or side leg printed component, and then only use it in a single set. The more sets a piece appears in, the easier and cheaper it is for LEGO designers to be able to include it in their builds, by spreading the cost across multiple different sets. So let's bring the focus back to Bionicle. The big question is, could Bionicle work as a theme without having a unique mold per set? And I would argue that honestly, it really doesn't. One of the core competencies of Bionicle, and the reason why it was so successful, was that every single character had a unique mask, and this mask was molded in a unique color that you could really only get in that set. Now, if LEGO were to create Bionicle today, it doesn't make sense for them to do it. Even if you look at their most successful themes, at their highest earners, just even looking at the original themes, which usually get a lot of love when it comes to new molds. Let's just go ahead and count the new molds that Ninjago as an entire theme got in 1 year. In 2024, Ninjago received 15 new molds. 4 of them were for gimmick sets, which honestly kind of fall into their own category. 10 of them were for minifigure parts, so armor, helmets, weapons, accessories, you name it, and then there was one final large-scale blade element introduced to really tie all of the sets in the theme together. Now let's take a look at a random year of Bionicle. And I'm going to be very kind in this comparison. I'm going to choose a year of Bionicle that they did not introduce a new building system for. So, unlike 2004, 2005, or 2006, which all introduced pretty much radically new building types for their creatures, I'm going to go with 2007, which built off of the Toa Inika system. Going through just a casual look at these sets, I counted 48 new molds introduced across the entirety of the Bionicle 2007 lineup. And I'm probably missing some, because I'm probably forgetting some that were introduced that year and I didn't even realize they were new for 2007. That is insane. I do not think I can name a single LEGO theme that got close to receiving that amount of new molds dedicated for just 1 year's worth of their theme in really any recent amount of history. Even going 5 or 8 years back in terms of LEGO, I cannot remember the last time a LEGO theme got that many new pieces for just the theme itself. Oh, you know what's even crazier? Almost half of those molds introduced for Bionicle 2007 were never seen again outside of that year. That's right, over 20 new molds were created for single-use purposes, mostly appearing in only the set they debuted in, which is also pretty crazy if you compare it against any other LEGO theme. Now you might be wondering, well, okay, LEGO was able to do it and make money just fine all the way back in the day, so why can't they do it today? And the question isn't really about why can't they. The question is why should they? Making Bionicle 2007 was a much more costly endeavor than really making any other LEGO set for any other individual LEGO theme if you just look at the parts cost alone to create the new molds. Sure, LEGO could and definitely is probably in a much better position nowadays to absolutely be able to spend that much money on a theme, but why would they? And especially, why would they on a theme like Bionicle? And that brings us to our second point.
I didn't slip.
So here is the really interesting thing about this next point. It kind of isn't even really in LEGO's hands to bring back Bionicle. If the entire full force behind LEGO wanted to bring back Bionicle today, there are external factors that literally prevent them from doing so. And this is all thanks to a little thing called Bionicle Generation 2. Now, the inception of Bionicle G2 is a pretty crazy story, and that's something that absolutely deserves its own video. I've gotten a chance to speak at length to Bionicle co-creator Christian Faber about how Bionicle G2 even came about, and honestly, we're not even 100% sure what can and cannot be said publicly, so I'm just gonna say this. Bionicle G2 came at a time where LEGO was really happy about the success of the LEGO Movie in 2014 and how LEGO was doing really good, and they wanted to capitalize on their fans, especially their older fans, and bring back an old favorite. This was seen in the form of Pirates 2015, their attempts to bring back Castle around the same time, and of course, Bionicle G2. All I will say is that Bionicle G2 was not always the intended plan for Bionicle to come back. Everybody in LEGO imagined it would come back eventually. Obviously, it was still doing very well when it was cancelled by 2010. They just felt that Bionicle 2015 was not the right time to bring it back. And in retrospect, oh boy, were they right. You see, Bionicle 2015 came at a really weird time for LEGO. It was a time where LEGO was beginning to get a lot more public perception as maybe not just a toy for kids, really thanks to the LEGO Movie in 2014. But it wouldn't be until 2020 where LEGO really capitalized on their adult audience and started to really tap into the fact that, yeah, a lot of the people buying LEGO sets are not parents buying for their kids. It's parents or just adults buying for themselves. But in 2015, this mentality was really not quite there yet. And here's the other thing. In 2015, most people who grew up with Bionicle were probably in college, maybe just starting to graduate, or some even just starting college. To put it simply, financially speaking, if LEGO was banking on Bionicle G1's original audience of kids to come back as adults or older teens and support Bionicle G2, well, it kinda came at the wrong time. They simply were not financially there to be able to just spend a lot of their income on plastic toys, and LEGO would absolutely have to wait a few years to be able to capitalize on that. One could argue that now, in 2025, this problem is no longer an issue. LEGO could absolutely bring back Bionicle today, and I'm sure a lot of the old fans definitely have enough disposable income now where they could happily spend their money on LEGO, myself included. But the thing is, that's not what they decided to do. Instead, LEGO decided to bring back Bionicle in 2015. And what's worse is launch Bionicle at the same time as Star Wars CCBS. And you know what else came out in 2015? Star Wars The Force Awakens, the massive, massive return of the cinematic franchise back to theaters, which was galvanizing fans everywhere and putting all the toy-centric focus on Star Wars. That was a crazy time to be a fan of the franchise. Everybody, and I mean everybody, was getting behind the hype. Star Wars was not as divisive as it is today, shockingly so. Pretty much everyone was really rallying behind The Force Awakens and getting incredibly excited for it, and products were flying off the shelves. Everyone wanted to get their hands on Star Wars products, and especially LEGO Star Wars products. And so, LEGO decided to release their own brand of buildable action figures using CCBS, the same system they used for Bionicle G2, for Star Wars. And for the most part, in this very first year, it actually did pretty well. Sure, the line was pretty much divided into sets that were really, really cool, like General Grievous or the Stormtroopers or Kylo Ren, versus sets that were really, really uncanny and very, very poor selling, like any character which had a humanoid face. And that was a big problem with the entire LEGO Star Wars CCBS line as a whole. They never quite nailed the humanoid features on the non-robotic characters or the non-fully armored characters, which meant that sets like Boba Fett or Jango Fett or Darth Vader sold really well, and sets that were focused on Jyn Erso or Finn or Rey did not. A problem that eventually led to the theme's demise in 2018. But here's the thing. LEGO also decided to bring back Bionicle at the same time. And if you think about what made Bionicle Generation 1 so successful, it wasn't just the amazing toys, because don't get me wrong, that was a big factor of it. The toys were super innovative for their time, the combination of gear functions and Technic greebling and piston details and collectible masks, it was the perfect storm. But the real reason why so many people stayed with Bionicle was the story. And the story was something that honestly led to Bionicle G1's downfall in the end. It got way too convoluted, where a kid joining the theme, even just a few years after it had come out, would probably be incredibly confused unless they had read like every single book, comic, played every game, read every web serial, followed all of the different random bits of Bionicle knowledge being put out there. Bionicle never had a mainline TV show where you could follow the plot. It barely had a few movies, and the movies themselves didn't really tell the full story. There was no easy jumping on point for Bionicle, and this became more and more obvious as the years went on. Someone joining in 2006 could maybe get behind the aesthetics and the toys being cool, but unless they had really followed the story from 2001, it was gonna be really hard to understand what on earth was going on. What on earth was a Kanohi Ignika? Who was Mata Nui? And what, pray tell, was the difference between a Krana, a Kranakal, a Krata, a Krakua, a Krakan, a Krahu, or just the prefix Kra? And yes, those are all real, look them up on Biosector 01. I wish I was joking. The point of the matter is, Bionicle was losing its audience year after year, and new kids could not join the story because it was nearly impossible to decipher. By the time the theme ended, they had a million different factions with a bazillion different characters, each with their own motivations, people double-crossing, triple-crossing, quadruple-crossing each other, all sorts of crazy characters, parallel universes, the multiverse, alternate versions of different characters, time travel, retcons. It was kind of crazy. And don't get me wrong, I love the Bionicle story and how complex it is, and that was a big reason as to why I got into LEGO myself as a fan. But it really wasn't for everyone, and that became very, very obvious. And so for Bionicle Generation 2, they decided to just change things around a little bit, and to make the story a lot more simple. Unfortunately, because of this, they course-corrected way too far, where making the story simple equated to removing names from some of the characters, calling them the Protector of Fire, Earth, Water, you name it, and then later changing their minds and saying, well, maybe that was a bad idea not to give some of our new characters names, and announcing their names in a random comic that also was given no guidance on where to steer the story, and was conflating things between Generation 1 and Generation 2, especially when it came to the Mask of Time. The one thing that they did do really well at the beginning was to have Bionicle have an actual TV show, a Netflix original that told the story of the main heroes in a chronological format, which would have been a really, really great sign, except for the fact that this show came out in year 2. That's right, for some reason, they decided not to start the theme off with a show and instead tell the story of year 1 through incredibly randomly published shorts on the LEGO YouTube channel that seemed to have no rhyme or reason as to when and what time they would be published, and offered the most minute little tiny tidbits of story here and there that told the very, very basic premise stripped down to its bare bones. Bionicle 2015, in summary, was honestly just a bit of a soulless remake. In their attempts to make the story more easily digestible to kids and people jumping on, they made it almost way too simplified, and it became really hard for anybody to jump onto the story. Younger fans and kids were more interested in these stories that LEGO was telling with Ninjago, which by this time had built up its own unique lore and history, all being told through a very digestible format of their TV show. Or kids were getting into Star Wars, or getting into Marvel and the MCU and the Avengers, and they were really relying on good stories. At a time where good stories was the mark of a successful IP, Bionicle came out as almost the antithesis of having a good and deep lore to their storyline. In fact, it was specifically designed to not have a deep and convoluted lore, and I think that really went back and hit LEGO very badly, because not only was it really hard for younger kids to get into Bionicle, the older fans had really nothing to grasp onto. Sure, the toys were amazing, and I will stand by that. They were a little controversial when they came out, and we're gonna touch on this when we get to point number 4 on this list, but by and large, I was really impressed by the toys. For the first time, they had friction-added gearboxes with full posability on the ball joints, allowing for probably, I would argue, the most playable Bionicle sets ever made, and some of the best in my opinion. I know it's probably a very hot take to say that, but it's a hot take to say anything in the Bionicle community, you know? I could say the AV Matoran are some of the lamest Matoran builds ever, and I would have at least one person in the comments avidly defending them with their life. It's just honestly a part of why I also love the Bionicle community so much. People care so deeply about Bionicle, to the point where if they perceive it isn't done right, there are pretty steep consequences. I, of all people, would know that very well. All that to say is that Bionicle G2 didn't really have an audience in any regard. It didn't bring in new fans, it didn't capture the hearts of old fans, it wasn't really made for anyone, and even people internally within the company could kind of tell that. People wanted Bionicle to have a few more years on hiatus before being brought back, before having a big triumphant return. 2015 was not the right time to bring back Bionicle, and the way it was brought back, the story that it was brought back with, just wasn't right. Well, all that to say is that Bionicle G2, to the surprise of almost nobody, absolutely flopped. I mean, these sets did not do well. They performed so poorly that LEGO prematurely canceled the theme, ending it before the planned 3-year run. For LEGO to do this, that has to mean a theme performed so badly that it wasn't even worth releasing sets they had already designed because they probably would lose money by just putting them into production. To put it into perspective, the last time this happened was for LEGO Video, which was one of LEGO's most public and embarrassing failures to date, where they had an entire second year ready to go and just completely scrapped it. I mean, at least Bionicle G2 lasted 2 years, but even then, those sets were not performing well by the end of the run. And the most important lesson to be taken away from this is that retailers were hurt the most when it came to Bionicle G2's poor performance. When retailers stock LEGO sets that do not sell well, they end up losing money if these sets do not sell, and having to put it on sale themselves, thus cutting into their own margins. Bionicle G2 was a prime example of this. These sets lingered on store shelves, especially the ones that were not as popular, and because of that, most retailers like Target, Walmart, you name it, had to continually discount them just to be getting rid of Bionicle, just to clear up space on shelves for different themes. I even went in near the final years of 2016 and found most Bionicle sets at 50% off at a retailer around me, and this was pretty commonplace all around the world. Unfortunately, because of this combination of the story, the sets, and just poor timing, Bionicle G2 did not do well, regardless of how you feel about it, and it was ended prematurely. Nowadays, because of that, unfortunately the brand name is pretty much tainted, and this is, in my opinion, the #1 most important reason as to why it doesn't make sense for LEGO to bring back Bionicle. No retailer is going to want to stock it again. Sales were already dwindling in 2009 and 2010 when LEGO decided to pull the theme, and after speaking to insiders working on the theme at the time, LEGO specifically chose to pull the theme in 2009 and 2010 because it was still selling well enough that retailers would be willing to stock the theme again if they were to ever bring it back. Sales were not so abysmal that LEGO could not convince retailers to stock the sets again. Well, I'm gonna be honest with you. After 2015 and 2016, sales were in fact so abysmal that no retailer is really going to be willing to stock Bionicle again. It's just an unfortunate fact of themes that do not perform well. It's the same reason why that even if LEGO were to come up with a very radical new way to rebrand video that would be loved by everyone, they never could release it under that same name, because the brand name itself has been tainted. Sure, maybe retailers might forgive and forget, but this is honestly the way the toy industry works, even outside of just LEGO. When certain sets do not sell well or certain toys don't sell well, retailers just simply will take stock of what brands didn't sell and choose not to stock them in the future. When retailers don't stock sets, that means a much more limited distribution, and that equates to poorer sales for the theme. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy at that point, and Bionicle is the biggest example of this. In fact, most retailers nowadays are generally averse to brick-built action figures coming from LEGO in general because of the failure of Bionicle G2 and the subsequent extremely poor sales of Star Wars CCBS, especially near the end of its run, when it was getting more and more expensive and the humanoid characters just simply were not selling. All this to say is that retailers will not want to stock Bionicle again, and that is a big reason as to why it doesn't make sense for LEGO to bring it back. But speaking of the story of G2, I think it's time we go into our third point.
My goodwill refused.
Now, point number 3 on this list, I will admit, is probably the most solvable out of all of these problems. If you were to set aside the way that LEGO's mentality has changed with molds, and the way that G2 basically scared off any retailers from stocking Bionicle again, I do genuinely think this point can be solved with the right team. But nevertheless, it is still a big problem and a big point to have to resolve in order to figure out how to bring back Bionicle. And that is, how do you handle the story? Bionicle G1 was famously cancelled because the story got too convoluted and complex. It was hard for folks to jump on, and while it was a really fun and engaging story for longtime fans, it just simply wasn't that sustainable for a long-term audience. Even the biggest and most popular franchises, who might seem unstoppable at the peak of their popularity, need some sort of a soft reboot to keep new fans interested. And those soft reboots, for better or for worse, can radically change the public's perception of the IP. That's why nailing the story behind any sort of Bionicle reboot, or really any LEGO theme in general, is so important. LEGO original themes nowadays live and die by the quality of their story. LEGO kinda got lucky in 2011 by hiring the Hageman brothers to write Ninjago, making it incredibly popular upon launch and lasting all of these years. And even still, they continually have to reinvent Ninjago and soft reboot it every few years. It's still one single canon, it's still one continuous story, but every few years they tend to change up the storyline. Right now we're in a multi-year arc, which is one of the most mature and in-depth arcs that Ninjago has ever had, but just a few years prior, we had a soft reboot that was a little bit more lighthearted, and a bit of a shorter time period. Right before that, we had one of the darkest and most serious Ninjago arcs yet with the Oni trilogy, and you get the point. Even for one of LEGO's most profitable long-running original themes like Ninjago, they still have to reintroduce new elements to the story, redefine the story itself, and just soft reboot it every few years to keep it fresh, allowing older fans to still continue enjoying the story, but allowing newer fans to be able to have points at which they hop on. I can name 4 or 5 different points at which you could start watching Ninjago today and pretty much get the gist of the story. In fact, I started a couple of my friends on Ninjago Season 8, and some would argue you could even start in Season 11, and you could start with the most recent Dragons Rising Season 1 from last year. All of those are great points where even if you haven't watched any of the previous show, you can kind of get the gist of it. It would be like watching an Avengers movie without watching all of the previous Marvel movies. Sure, if you've seen everything that's come before, it would really help your enjoyment of the movie and you'd probably appreciate the story a lot more, but they're specifically designed so that you can jump on and just watch Avengers, and you get the gist of it. You understand what Iron Man is all about without having to have seen all of the previous Iron Man movies, and so on and so forth. That is not something I can say about Bionicle. Despite their attempts to sort of soft reboot the story with a new team of characters every few years, the story was absolutely still building towards an end goal, something incredibly complex, and as it kept going, it got more and more and more layered. The world became a lot more convoluted. New characters would continue to pop up again and again, and side characters would be introduced, and then return literally years down the line to play pivotal moments, and to the general audience member, if you didn't know who these characters were, Bionicle would be very, very confusing. Add to the fact that due to the incredibly rich world building, which kind of ended up being a double-edged sword, Bionicle characters spoke their own language, had their own sub-dialects, had unique words that correspond to other words in the English language, were part of so many different factions. It was a world made up of dozens upon dozens of different species, each of which came from their own homeland and had their own motivations. Suffice to say, it just was getting incredibly, incredibly dense and hard to get into. So to bring back Bionicle today, the story being right is the most important thing. It cannot be a continuation of the Bionicle Generation 1 that so many fans loved and grew up with, because if you were to bring it back today and just have it pick up right where things left off, that would be absolutely nonsensical. The average kid would have no idea what was going on. Even a lot of die-hard Bionicle fans fell off halfway through the run, and for us to pick up in Spherus Magna, in this brand new world, it would be almost impossible to honor what had come before while still being able to have it be digestible for new audiences. To bring it back, it would have to be a different universe, or maybe just a different story set within the same universe. But then you lose the actual brand recognition of the iconic characters. And this is all summing up to my final point. Point number 4 as to why I think it is going to be almost impossible and a very unenviable task to bring Bionicle back.
Dare you enter the deep, dare you face the creeps.
So jumping into point number 4, this revolves around the fan base. And as I said at the start of this video, I love the Bionicle community. It is probably one of the most passionate subgroups of a LEGO fan theme that I have ever been a part of. Even comparing it to something like Ninjago, or even the fans of specific LEGO themes like superheroes or Star Wars or you name it, Bionicle fans are a different breed, and everybody has their own opinion on the best best way to bring Bionicle back. The folks who grew up with Bionicle and fell in love with the story above all, maybe even didn't really even care about the sets, had a couple of the sets here and there, but really got drawn into the world and the lore, would probably be totally fine with Bionicle being brought back in any sort of form as long as the story was good. And a subset of those people would only be happy if it was brought back as a continuation of Bionicle Generation 1, which we already addressed is basically impossible and just not a financially smart idea for LEGO to do. Sure, maybe there's a way that LEGO could bring back Bionicle as a minifigure theme here. You know, make the characters into minifigures, have the masks be these collectible helmets that the minifigures could wear. I could totally see a system minifigure-based Bionicle working, and it being a pretty fun and viable action-based theme. But the thing is, if you were to bring Bionicle back as a minifigure-based theme, probably the easiest way for LEGO to bring it back today, treat it like a Ninjago, have maybe only a few new molds for the theme, you can print the different masks on more generic helmets, so you could totally get away with just having the same molds being shared, it could totally work. But you're only going to be pleasing at best a very, very small percentage of the people who love Bionicle. A lot of the original Bionicle fans fell in love with Bionicle because they were action figures, because you could customize your own action figures, because you could make your own characters in the story, because you could collect the masks. The toys are a big part of why Bionicle was so successful. So maybe LEGO doesn't want to focus on just the older fans. Maybe they want to bring in new fans. But then, why introduce Bionicle when it is courting controversy at that point to bring it back as a system theme, where you're gonna have older fans of the theme telling younger folks, hey, don't support this, tell LEGO to bring it back, I want the real Bionicle, this is not the real Bionicle, it's minifigures, I don't like minifigures. Why not just focus on a new theme, something completely unique, that is guaranteed to have a lot more profit potential than resurrecting an older theme in a form that it's not? Then, of course, there is another angle they could achieve it. They could bring it back as system brick-built action figures. We've been seeing LEGO put out system brick-built action figures for the past few years now. Mostly, these have been relegated to the superheroes theme. Superheroes, of course, are known for action figures, so it was perfect logical sense for LEGO to produce action figures based off of superhero characters. Spider-Man, Iron Man, Green Goblin, Venom, you name it, LEGO has made a ton of masked superhero characters, and for once they seem to have realized their fatal flaw in these Star Wars action figures and pretty much just focused on characters wearing some sort of mask or having some sort of alien-like face for these buildable characters, largely steering away from characters who have human flesh exposed. And when they did produce some of those characters, they were pretty mixed in their results, to say the least. Regardless, the sets seem to be doing alright enough that LEGO continues to produce them year after year. Even though I continuously see them on store shelves, they seem to be some of the least popular LEGO superhero sets, honestly some of the least popular LEGO sets in general. For whatever reason, I guess there is an audience for them, so LEGO continues to make them. Or maybe LEGO just keeps on trying to make construction work for LEGO, and making it brick-built is the only viable way to make it happen in today's world. But therein lies the big problem. Most OG Bionicle fans are probably not going to accept any sort of system brick-built Bionicle. People fell in love with Bionicle because they were these customizable, posable action figures with very specialized pieces. It was really cool to be able to get a Bionicle set and discover 5 or 6 different unique elements that you'd never seen before that were made specifically to make the character unique. And the one thing that you might notice about the way that the Marvel and DC superhero action figures are built out of LEGO, they tend to all kind of feel the same. Most of them are built with identical legs, identical arms, identical torso builds, identical shoulder builds, using literally these same pieces for the heads, just printed slightly differently. And while, again, Bionicle was absolutely no stranger to clone sets, in fact, they would oftentimes produce these same exact sets, just colored slightly differently, One of the big draws out of Bionicle was that at least every single year and every single set wave, you were getting something completely different than what you had gotten before, sometimes radically different, and that cost a lot of money with molds, as we talked about at the beginning of the video. It's just something not very feasible for LEGO to do nowadays, and I guess that if they were to brick build them out of system pieces, you could argue that with system, they could be more customizable than ever. If you want a character to have wide lower legs and skinny upper arms, just build the arms slightly differently. You have infinite customization potential with the LEGO brick, as opposed to prefab pieces. And honestly, I could personally totally get behind Bionicle being built like this. Maybe at least having an exclusive mask per set, and that's about it. Just kind of use a similar template across the sets, have some sort of difference in the way the bodies are built or the limbs are built to add some variation into the builds. But I am not most Bionicle fans, and I think most Bionicle fans would not be happy with something like this. Even if they were to pursue the same exact style of a smaller style of build created for the Bionicle gift with purchase set, Tahu and Takua, which, to be fair, a lot of folks in the Bionicle community did totally gravitate towards and absolutely fall in love with, I still don't feel that people think that this is a decent successor to Bionicle. If anything, it's a fun little gimmick to be able to rebuild your favorite Bionicle sets in this new style. But if LEGO were to put out these sets as a brand new theme, marketed as the return of Bionicle, I think they'd have very, very different results. I think that they would honestly just be held to a lot more scrutiny than most other LEGO GWPs or smaller little Easter eggs here and there, because, well, it's the return of Bionicle. It's what people have been waiting for and anticipating and building up to, and having just something brick built with limited customizable options and limited unique pieces would definitely be something that most original Bionicle fans would not accept. And if LEGO doesn't have a built-in fanbase who is guaranteed to rally behind whatever they do, which I don't think exists, I do not think that there exists a Bionicle fanbase who will be happy with anything LEGO puts out, then why even bring back Bionicle? Why not just build a new fanbase and make a brand new original theme? And to be fair, that's what LEGO has been trying to do. They've been trying to make new LEGO themes year after year. Original themes are still around. Even with the domination of licensed themes on store shelves, we're still getting fantastic original LEGO themes and ideas, which I think is really great. It just isn't Bionicle, and maybe it doesn't make sense to be, if there really isn't any reason to bring it back. Honestly, with all of those points summed up, I think that I've pretty much covered all the different reasons as to why I think that it just doesn't make sense for LEGO to bring Bionicle back. They are a very different company in terms of their policy around the creation of unique molds now. They really can't bring it back to most retailers thanks to the failure of G2. It's really hard to figure out how to nail the story down correctly, especially after the learnings they took from Bionicle G1 and why that story ended up the way it did, and last and maybe most importantly of all, it is literally impossible to make every old fan happy, even the majority of older fans happy. I genuinely think that no matter what path they choose, if it were to be a minifigure system-based theme that just retains the Bionicle story, or a system brick-built action figure line, no matter what they do within the current confines of the LEGO system, there is no real way to make everyone happy. Even if they were to bring back Bionicle G1 1-to-1, which would literally never happen, there would still be a big subset of Bionicle fans who I'm sure would say they wanted LEGO to evolve on the concept and come up with something new. There is no way to please everybody. It's a lot harder to do that because Bionicle was kind of its own thing in the LEGO system. If Ninjago were to be discontinued today, and 10 years from now, we're talking about how possible is it for LEGO to bring Ninjago back, they have to jump through a lot less hoops and jump far fewer hurdles to do something like that. It is, after all, just a system-based theme. Just write a new story for them and bring back some of the old characters and you have Ninjago. Bionicle is a lot more complicated to bring back and make a viable theme than that, and I think a lot of people, especially internally at LEGO, are realizing that. But of course, I do want to end the video with a bit of a silver lining. It's not all doom and gloom, there are still a lot of prospects for Bionicle related stuff to happen in the future. If you're looking for stuff from LEGO Official, well, we got the gift with purchase that had pretty generally positive feedback across all of the community, and I'm sure that LEGO saw that and might even do something like it again. And most importantly, a lot of Bionicle fans in the company are LEGO designers. They are fans of the theme and continue to include references to the theme as stickers. I see even a lot of discourse in the community about this, with people saying why even bother with the stickers if that's all we're gonna get, and honestly, I don't really understand these complaints. I mean, if LEGO is not going to bring it back, I personally absolutely welcome any Easter eggs snuck into random LEGO sets that just reference and pay homage to the old theme. I mean, if I worked for LEGO as a designer, I absolutely would be fighting to include as many Bionicle references in sets as possible, even if it is just including a little sticker here and there. And of course, with the success of the Bionicle GWP, we may still get more, and System Bionicle is technically still possible. Let's say LEGO makes a collectible minifigure series in the future, there's nothing stopping them from making Tahu as a minifigure and calling him like an islander, or having a minifigure dressed up as a Bionicle character as a collectible minifigure, where they even could make a brand new mold for a mask there, because collectible minifigures are unlike any other LEGO theme in that they do get new molds made not necessarily per figure, but for most of the figures to make them all feel unique and special. And they can get away with that because collectible minifigures consistently sell very well and are very, very cheap. They're only $5, as opposed to a Bionicle set nowadays, which would probably cost $20 to $25 for just a single main character. Altogether, I still feel like even outside of official LEGO, the Bionicle fan community is very alive. Folks are growing up and learning new skills and developing incredible pieces of Bionicle content, from new video games, to movies, to shorts, to fan retellings of old stories and new, to animations and everything in between. The Bionicle fan community continues to put out some incredible work, and some of the coolest stuff I have seen any sub-theme of LEGO collectors put out, even across the entire genre of LEGO collecting. Bionicle fans are truly passionate about the theme, and as long as people remember the stories and pass down the legend, there will always be folks to keep on carrying on the torch and bringing the love for Bionicle into new generations. And so, that about sums up this video about why I think it doesn't quite make sense for LEGO to bring Bionicle back, but how there's nothing stopping you from keeping Bionicle alive in your hearts and in the creative world. That's all for now. Thank you so much for tuning in, and Happy New Year. Be sure to stay tuned for even more LEGO news, reviews, discussion, and analyses coming your way very soon.